because the landlords kept putting up their rents, up. Their husbands, their fathers, their sons, their brothers were all fighting in the First World War. Eventually the trade unions, about 32 trade unions in Glasgow, joined them, resisting the rent increases. They went to George's Square, massive march. Eventually the government overturned it, and that was fine. They won it. The people won it. 75 years later, we had the anti-poll tax movement. We won that one as well. The Scottish Socialist Party was in the forefront fighting for that one. So the reason I tell people that is you've got to believe that you can win this. It's been done before. You can do it again. Okay. So without any more ado, I'll pass you over to Alec. Thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you all for coming out tonight and uniting against this draconian bedroom tax. I'll tell you a wee bit about myself. My name's Alec, I'm 28-year-old. I split up with my partner a year ago. I've got 2 kids, a wee girl that's 10, my wee boy's 3. They come and stay with me at the weekends, school holidays and that. But because they're not with me full time, I have to pay bedroom tax. So, I've not had my letter yet. I mean, it came in the 1st of April and I've still not had a letter. I've still not been told how much I need to pay.
The American Housing Association, and they had me in Sharpish last week.
No, it's the council. But it's going to be approximately £10 a week I'll be paying. That's what I've heard from other people. And that's off of my job seekers allowance of £71. But on top of that, I've got my bedroom tax, I've got my council tax, I've got food, I've got electricity, I've got travel to job centre, things like that. Clothes if I get a job interview. My kids, I need to pay money towards my kids. I've still got to pay some of my rent just now. My housing benefit still doesn't cover all my rent, so I've still got to pay that, and then my bedroom tax on top of that. So, my 10-year-old girl, you know, I mean, she's like, the next couple of years she's turning into a young lady, and Lord Freud, or Lord Fraud I like to call him, says put them in a pull-out bed in the living room. I mean, a 10-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy, that's not right. I don't think that's right. So, they say downsize, take our modules or downsize. Well, if you take our modules, you'll still get the chance. You don't know that person, how do you know what their life, what their past is? I mean, downsize, what are we going to downsize to? There's no houses to downsize to. So, and get a job, work more hours. Well, people are losing their jobs by the day. There's no jobs out there. So, if they create the jobs, then yeah, we'll be happy to get a job. I mean, create the houses and some people will be happy to downsize. So, I'd like to say as well that when you do get your letter, most of you probably have had your letter, appeal it. If everybody appeals it, it's going to cost them a lot of money and it's going to clog up the system. And if you're paying at the council office, then paying small change, 1 pence, 2 pence, 5 pence. I mean, hit them that way. I'm actually part of a group on Facebook called Bedroom Tax. Think it's unfair, join the fight here. It's got close to 12,000 members now, and there's a lot of useful information in that, a lot of support. A lot of people feel down and need somebody to talk to. It's really useful, I found. I met a woman on that, Cheryl, and she's there's a grandson, Carson Lee, and he died within 3 months. And his ashes are buried in the garden at a wee monument. And if she doesn't pay this bedroom tax, she's evicted. What is she going to do with her grandson's ashes? So it's hitting a lot of people in different ways. They just do not think about the different ways it's hitting people. So yeah, I think that's about it. I'd just like to say, I'm not taking any more here. I've had enough.
Yeah.
So I think we should all stand.
There's prisoners who are going to be left with more human rights than children.
Yeah,
I bet they've got the choice of 5 food and veg and 8 plates every day. When housing asked me, how are you going to find the money to pay this tax? I says, well, I won't be offering my children the range of fruit and vegetables that the government recommends as health.
That's the thing.
Right, okay, right.
since then she's come out and went, oh, if Labour get into power, we will keep the bedroom tax, we'll just change it about a bit. But she lived on it for £18 for a week, and she even says, well, how are we going to get all our fruit and veg, everything that the government says that you need to. But no, I think we should all stand united, look out for your neighbours, and we'll put an end to this tax. Thank you.
Hey, here.
Well, brothers and sisters, like Denise, and thank you for coming. It's tempting when you see good weather in Scotland that you exploit it and stay outside instead of coming inside to a meeting. But I think what that shows, the fact that quite a number of local people have attended this meeting, which is the latest in the whole series that we've had as a party across, particularly the west of Scotland. It shows that people are up in arms at this, probably the most vicious of a whole package of attacks that have been launched by the millionaire cabinet in Westminster. And the first thing I want to dwell on, to really lay it on thick, is that when we look at the bedroom tax, we shouldn't treat it in isolation. We shouldn't treat it as something that stands alone, because that's exactly what the government wants us to do. They want us to think that because at a UK level only 670,000 people are affected, or in Scotland only 105,000 households are clobbered by this bedroom tax, that therefore it doesn't affect me. But one of the really encouraging things for us is that at the street stalls the Scottish Socialist Party has been doing sometimes 2 or 3 times a week in Irvine, the number of people who have come up and said, this doesn't actually affect me, but signed the petitions, bought the Scottish Socialist Voice with the great coverage we have, there's the commercial break over, and agreed to become involved in fighting back against the bedroom tax. Because instinctively what those people realise is that this is just the last straw that's breaking the camel's back. This is the latest in a succession of attacks conducted by a government of the millionaires, by the millionaires, for the millionaires. 23 out of 29 in the cabinet are millionaires. Something like 4 of them are ex-bankers, top bankers I'm talking, not clerks on the desk. And that gives you a clue about what they're there for. They're there to carry out a vicious wealth transfusion from the neediest to the greediest, from the millions to the millionaires, from the working class to the rich, the capitalists, the upper class, whatever you want to call them. That is their purpose in life, and that is the purpose of conducting with zeal. Because when you look back since they were coming into power, I don't say elected because they weren't, it's a coalition that's imposed itself on the country with absolutely no democratic mandate even in England, let alone in Scotland particularly, where in Scotland's case 85% of it voted against the Tories in the last Westminster election. But that coalition of Tories and Lib Dems, the twin Tories as I've repeatedly named them, that coalition has conducted a whole succession of attacks that amounts to naked class war against working class people. For example, they have demonised the disabled and the sick in order to isolate them from the rest of society. They have talked about the shirkers and the workers. They've talked about the strivers and the skivers. And to their shame, as an aside, Labour spokespeople have used exactly the same language. For example, Liam Byrne, the shadow spokesperson for Labour for Welfare, has used exactly the same kind of vicious language towards some of the most vulnerable in society. And when they do that, it's to divide us and conquer us. It's to divide and rule, to divide and rob, because that's what they're doing, robbing. They're robbing wages. Wages are at their lowest share of national wealth since records began in 1956. If, for example, a worker today on 12,500 of an income had kept up the share compared to the mid-70s, they'd be on something like 23,000 a year instead. That's the way in which wages have been driven down consciously by the ruling class and their successive pet governments. They've driven wages down. They've driven benefits down, demonising the sick and disabled. They've used the work capability assessments by Atos, a multinational, which has got millions of pounds of privatised contracts through the government's DWP. They then perform miracles. Their headquarters in Glasgow and Cadogan Street is locally known as Lourdes. I don't know what faith you have, if any, but you're familiar, I'm sure, with the term of Lourdes. Well, they're nicknamed that by locals because you go in sick, disabled, unfit for work, and lo and behold, a student or a nurse at best, not a doctor quite often, somebody half-trained at best, decides that you're fit for work. And you enjoy a miraculous cure on the style of Lourdes when you come out of that centre. And what's that designed for? It's primarily designed to slash the benefits that people get by driving them down into lower levels of benefit and saying that they're fit for work. And the cruel fact is that hundreds of people who've been declared fit for work have died within months of that declaration. Literally died. That is the cruelty of the cuts against some of the sickest and most disabled people in society. That's one part of their cuts programme towards the welfare bill. Because what they've said is that they want to cut benefits by at least 20% in terms of the budget, in order to bail out the bankers, in order to pay for that bailout, and in order to enrich the rich even further. They're attacking the poorest with things like benefit cuts to sick and disabled people. But they've gone, of course, well beyond that as well. They've carried out further anti-union laws that came in this week alongside the bedroom tax to make it almost impossible for workers to defend themselves when they're victimised by their employers. Another way of getting more out of fewer workers for bigger profits for the rich that rule the roost. That's the kind of government and society that we suffer. When it comes to the question of the bedroom tax, that again goes in a twin track with something in contrast that happened on the same day. 1st of April, I've said before, forgive the repetition if you've been to another meeting. 1st of April, April Fool's Day, the Tories and Liberals obviously decided we're all a bunch of fools, because they thought we would not spot that on the one side there's 670,000 people in Britain, 105,000 households in Scotland suffering an average cut of about £14 a week to their housing benefit, the bedroom tax. And on the other side, there's a few thousand millionaires in this country. I think it's something like 13,000 in total. Those millionaires have enjoyed a rise in their income of £107,000 a year since this week because of tax cuts on the top rate of tax from 50 to 45%. And by the way, it's set to go down to 40% in the near future. That, alongside the fact they've cut corporation tax for big business, and I mean big business. Corporation tax is now going to be at the same level of taxation as you or me if you work on a minimum wage, 20%. The same as small shops have to pay, 20%. When it actually was at 52% before that hate figure of capitalism, Maggie Thatcher, came into office in 1979. That's how much the rich have enriched themselves, engorged themselves, and that the working class and the poorest are suffering the consequences. We're paying for their wealth, as always. That's the nature of the society. Now, when it comes to the bedroom tax, I'm sure you're pretty familiar with it, so I don't want to spend too long tonight on some of the finer detail, but let me summarise for you again some of the iniquitous, vicious aspects of that particular measure. The bedroom tax, for example, declares that a single person or a couple are only entitled to one bedroom. Now, you might not think that's controversial in terms of a couple, for example, but if a couple, like hundreds of people that we've met on the streets, has one of the partnership who has severe ill health, things such as COPD, for example, which means that it's literally impossible to sleep at night, and it's even more impossible for their wife or husband or partner to sleep, they need a second bedroom for health reasons, for basic living, to survive the life that they're blessed with as a result of ill health. So therefore there's no allowance made for that in this vicious bedroom tax. Or as Alec has referred to, there's the case where a couple or a single person, a single parent, has children. What this Tory government, the party of the family, we're told, has declared is that if those children are both under 10, they're expected to share a bedroom. So much for encouraging the growth, maturity and independence of children. I've got an 8-year-old, my youngest child, and he already has begun to demand what he calls, I need privacy, every so often during the day. And that's a natural enough part of human development. And if he had another, his 2 older brothers are flown the nest, they're older, but if he had a brother or sister, he would be expected to share the bedroom with them up to the age of 10. And if, yes, well that's if they're same sex. If they're of the same gender, they're expected to share that to the age of 16, which is an abominable proposal. For example, my personal knowledge firsthand of my 2 older sons, his 2 brothers, his big brothers, when they were growing between 10 and 16, the idea of them sharing a bedroom wasn't perhaps the most peaceful suggestion to make. And they're good kids and all that, but they were growing, they were full of hormones, they were full of their own ideas and clashes between them and such like, and it's just ridiculous to suggest that kids can live in the same bedroom in a healthy way just because they're of the same gender up to the age of 16. And we get the situation, which is so common in life nowadays, of course, partly because, by the way, of the impact on married life or partnerships of precisely the vicious attacks of the governments in terms of the stress and strains that brings on life. Breakups of marriages and partnerships is common. And if you have children involved, then surely it should be in a civilised society in the best interest of those children, provided there's no other issues involved, for them to be able to have 2 loving, caring homes from each of their parents so that they can share the upbringing, they can visit and stay with the other parent or whatever way you want to express it, part of the week. And yet what they're saying, as Alex described, is that you're not allowed, if you're the second parent in terms of benefit situations, if you're the second carer of the 2 parents, you're not entitled to a bedroom for that child or children. You have to pay a bedroom tax on it. And they also, until the public outcry became too much for them, they also had it planned that soldiers' families would have to pay a bedroom tax. Now, precisely the areas that are worst hit by the likes of the bedroom tax and other benefit cuts and so on are the same districts that are targeted by the army and the armed forces to recruit working class boys and sometimes girls into the armed forces to go and kill or be killed in the killing fields of Afghanistan or God knows where else next, maybe Syria or whatever, and yet they were going to have a bedroom tax on the bedroom that squaddies on leave were coming back to stay in. The outcry is so great that they've partially retreated on that. Likewise on the issue of foster parents I should say, because at first there was a blanket rule under the bedroom tax legislation that because a foster child is not defined in law as a permanent resident, you're going to have to pay a bedroom tax on the bedroom that you would then be caring for children. Contrast that with the adverts, we need more foster parents, appealing for more people to take up that very responsible social caring role for young children that need it. And yet these bastards were preparing to charge a bedroom tax on it. And by the way, they still will do that if your room is not occupied by a foster child at the time. So it's only a very minor retreat that they've made on that subject. Don't believe the headlines. And in any case, the squaddies' families, the foster carers, even Cameron blurted it out as an aside, that in total across the United Kingdom, those 2 categories combined only make up less than 10,000 households. 10,000 out of 670,000. He said one was 5,000, the other was less than 5,000. So make it up to 10 to be generous to him. 10,000 out of 670,000 have been granted some kind of concession because of the public fury about what they were doing. And the last example I'll mention is the one of students. Working class families are told repeatedly, get an education for your children and get a future. And I support that. I'm a great advocate of that. But how are they going to study if, for example, at the minute under the bedroom tax laws, they have to spend at least 2 weeks of the year in their family's bedroom, otherwise they'll be charged the bedroom tax. But that's not a big issue. The big issue is the fact that when the separate benefit attack called Universal Credit comes into operation, which was supposed to be this October, has been delayed and probably won't happen for at least another year from now, maybe even 18 months by the looks of it, on a staggered basis. But that universal credit, that abominable plan to give people a lump sum and then a cap on the lump sum and then give them all of it monthly and expect them to sign on for it and claim it online regardless of their disabilities, for example, or their access to computers, all those things that makes up what's called universal credit. That system will then say that a student has to spend at least 6 months of the year in the family house, or otherwise the family will be charged a bedroom tax on that student's bedroom. Now that is a few examples of the abomination that makes up the bedroom tax. And the person who devised the detail of it, Alex referred to him, he's part of a family who are well chuffed with the bedroom tax. David and Priscilla Freud, they have a house in London in Highgate, valued at £1.9 million, with 4 bedrooms. They've got 3 children. They've grown up, they've flown the nest. Not for them the worry that many families have of how do we have a place without being charged for it, for the children to come back if, for example, their marriage breaks up for a while or something, or if they just want to stay for a few weeks, whatever, or for the grandchildren to come and stay and have another loving home to stay in and have their own bedroom available for them, and so on, when family changes take place with generations and years that way. Not for them to worry about that. The Freuds, their 3 have grown up and left. If they get grandkids, they don't have to worry about that, having to pay a bedroom tax and so on, because they own their house, and the house they live in London is the one they only live in during the weekdays and not during holidays or weekends, because the second house they have in Kent has 8 spare bedrooms. In total they have 11 spare bedrooms, and they rattle around in a mansion like that, or 2 mansions you should say. And then the same Lord David Freud, grandson of Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst, who maybe would have a few things to say about his grandson and his state of mind. But that character told people on the radio that they should let their children sleep on a fold-down couch when they came to stay with him, a separated father, similar setup to Alex described about himself. That's what Freud said on the radio to them. And when he was challenged about the squaddies families in that respect, he said something along the lines of, well, we have to cut the benefits bill, we have to cut the spending, we have a deficit that we can't cope with. And that brings me to a couple of points on that issue. Is there a need for this? It's an appalling attack on working class families, but is there a need for it? Is it one of those things where there's no alternative? Does it make sense? Does it cure problems in the economy? Well, no is the answer to all of those, actually. Because first of all, in terms of making sense, it makes no sense whatsoever from a financial point of view. Because, for example, if people are unable to combine eating with heating their home, with keeping a roof over their head by paying the bedroom tax, eventually they'll run up such rent arrears, they'll face the prospect of eviction. And if they are evicted, it's estimated by Shelby that on average an eviction costs the taxpayer £24,000 in Scotland. 24,000. And the other thing, which is the vicious irony of it, the crazy contradiction of this nonsense, is that if they are evicted, councils then have a legal obligation and duty to rehouse them. Where? Where will they rehouse them? In houses with at least as many bedrooms in most cases, sometimes even more, after the upheaval of being evicted, because there are no smaller houses available since the right to buy policy of Thatcher, continued by a Labour government, has failed to build houses of all different sizes and so on. That's one aspect of it. The other point, of course, from our standpoint, why the hell should people have to uproot themselves in any case? Why should they have to move to a house with less bedrooms? Why should they be... Well, I'll finish shortly, mate.
Come on, 40 minutes you've been speaking here.
No,
Did you see this? If they're going to evict us, and they'll get name it smaller to evict us too, why are they going to evict us? It's not going to happen, is it?
Well, let me...
It's not going to happen, it's a no-brainer.
It might not be a no-brainer, because already what has taken place, if you'll let me say so, what already has taken place is that in 2010 alone in Scotland, that year, 15,000 eviction cases were referred to the sheriff courts, and 5,000 of them led to action. Now, the action consisted of a procedure that was reinforced last August in law in Scotland, which I won't give all the fancy names for it, but kind of pre-eviction action that's required. And what that means is that housing associations and councils are required to take action speedily before rent arrears mount up to any great level. And the most common kind of figure that has triggered the pre-eviction procedures to happen is a couple of £100. Now, if you're living on £71 a week and you're expected to pay £10, £12, £15 or whatever in bedroom tax, and you simply can't afford it, you don't have to be a mathematician to work out that it won't take long before you reach that level of potential eviction. And the other point is that those who have already been through that procedure at sheriff courts already are in a system of repayment of arrears. And if they are then affected by the bedroom tax, which in most cases will be, if that's the case, it'll take no time at all for them to face the prospect of being unable to pay the repayment system they've agreed and facing the threat of eviction. Which brings me to the point about evictions. The Scottish Socialist Party has said right from day one that one of the main things we have to prepare a resistance to is the threat of eviction. Not because it's illogical, of course it is. It's totally illogical to evict people from, say, for example, a 2-bedroom house, put them back in a 2-bedroom house after costing the taxpayer 64,000 quid, or maybe even a 3-bedroom, especially when there's no 1-bedrooms available. For example, just one example, North Lanarkshire Council, the biggest social landlord in Scotland, has 33,000 houses. You know how many of them are available for rent as 1-bedroom houses? 26. Not 26,000, 26 out of 33,000. How the hell will they rehouse people even if they wanted to move? Leaving aside the fact, why should they? Why shouldn't they stay in the home they've built, the neighbours they've got, the family they've invested in and so on? But that aside, it's not logical, but it's still part of a legal procedure which we have to challenge and resist. And what we've said is that those in power, elected power or otherwise, need to take the fear out of the minds of all those who face this threat by declaring that there'll be no evictions for bedroom tax arrears. Now, of course, the bedroom tax is a Westminster piece of legislation. That's true. But the Scottish Government do have the power, which to their shame they've not used so far. The SNP government have the power to declare that there be no evictions from any of the social sector. The SNP councils will not evict anybody, but that's only 9 out of 32. Plus, it doesn't take account whatsoever of the housing associations, the local housing associations. It doesn't cover it, whereas the Scottish Government, with the powers invested by a democratic mandate, should declare that in Scotland there'll not be a single eviction due to the bedroom tax, which would lift the fear of people's minds and would then raise the question, well, how are you going to fund the shortfall for the councils and the local housing associations? Which is the other demand that the Scottish Socialist Party, in common with the likes of Shelter and others, have made, which is that the Scottish Government should fund the shortfall, which is estimated at £53 million for the first year, that's going to be lost potentially in benefits going to housing associations and councils. They should fund that as a stopgap measure to stop the housing associations going into crisis and the councils likewise. But beyond that, let's go down to a more local level. We believe that every council, whether it's SNP-led, Labour-led or some mixture, should declare that there be no evictions whatsoever from their stock, from their council houses. And likewise, we need to put pressure on the local housing associations to say the same, because that in itself would then bring the fight to the government and say, we're not going to evict anybody, they're staying put, they're living in the houses they've already got, unless they seek to move, which is a different issue, and we're now demanding the money to fund the shortfall that you have created. Because what otherwise can people do? If they can't eat, heat and pay the bedroom tax, which is going to be the reality for loads, if that's the situation, then some will try to escape by going into the private sector. It makes no economic sense for society, because in the private sector rents are higher. On average, for example, just one example in Glasgow, the average cost in housing benefit for a social sector house, in terms of housing benefit to the taxpayer, is £63 a week. For the private sector, it's £90 a week. So it's 1.5 times as high if people are driven into the private sector, where landlords, private landlords, are making an absolute packet in many cases out of escalated, obscene levels of rent. And if you want to cut the housing benefit bill, I think there's a couple of measures could be looked at. One is to cap the level of rents in the private sector down to the level in the social sector, and the other is to create jobs and decent levels of pay so that people don't rely on housing benefit to subsidise landlords actually, rather than subsidising themselves.
Yeah.
And I'll finish on a couple of other concrete points, and that is that if we can put enough pressure on the councils, on the housing associations and the Scottish Government to do these things, brilliant. But if we can't, and we're continuing to do that, we're going to propose, for example, further protests at the local council meetings. But regardless of that, we need to prepare networks of defence for local people. An anti-bedroom tax union, whatever you want to call it, in this area, like we've established elsewhere in the town and beyond, in order to get people ready to say there'll be no evictions in our district. There'll be no evictions of any of the people that are in touch with us. We will form walls of human solidarity to prevent it if that's attempted. And it's a real and live threat, that threat of eviction, even though it makes absolutely no sense from a logical standpoint. And the other point I think that is really important is to recognise that as well as appealing against it, as Alex said, appealing against the benefits decision, and we'll give any help we can in terms of that, but slapping in appeal letters immediately, as well as doing that, as well as advising people stay put if that's your desire, and refuse to be browbeaten into leaving your home, and put the pressure on the council and the housing association, and organise the community to prevent any evictions from taking place. The other thing I think you should bear in mind is that as well as hopefully tonight all uniting and saying we'll form a local network, anti-bedroom tax union, what the hell you want to call it, that will defend people from this, as well as that, as an individual, at least consider the fact that there's absolutely no reason or cause for this to be coming about. There's no justification for it. We live in a rich society. We live in a society where a lot of wealth flies out into the hands of the very rich by, for example, tax dodging. The richest in society and big business escape and dodge £120,000 million a year in tax. And that's why we're increasing the tax on them. On their present level of taxation, which is pathetic compared to most countries, they actually dodge 120 billion. Now that figure means nothing to most of us. What can it be translated into? Simple example. 120 billion equals 4.8 million new jobs on £25,000 a year salary. There's an example. And for instance, instead of punishing people and trying to drive them back into single ends and overcrowded conditions and drive them into the private sector for the profit of big business, the banks and the private sector landlords, instead of doing that, which is definitely part of the motivation of the bedroom tax, why don't we argue instead for a very rational alternative, which is to build homes, to create homes for people, which would create jobs and apprenticeships and skills, and would give people a choice of the size of house that's suitable, and would plan ahead, because nobody wants to be living in a vast rattling expanse if they can avoid it, but instead they can have a choice of the size of house that they're after in the social sector, and affordable rents, and very high levels of environmental standards in the housing, to cut down fuel poverty and to cut down pollution in the environment where the heat escapes and you pay for it for the benefits of the profit margins of big electricity and gas companies, for instance. Instead of that, you could build environmentally advanced housing of all sorts of sizes for people of choice. You could have tenants' participation in the planning of local areas. You could have job creation. You could have jobs and skills and apprenticeships for young people to give them a future. You could have decent levels of wages so that you wouldn't have the same welfare benefit bills in the form of housing benefit, for example. You wouldn't need it. And at the same time, you could increase the benefits of those unable to work. For example, the pensioners, the sick, the disabled, with a decent living income, instead of the pittance that they have to try and survive on right now. We have a very rich society. The natural wealth, the human talent, the industrial wealth, the financial wealth in places like Edinburgh, for example, the city of Edinburgh, so to speak. We have all of that. The problem is it's in the hands of a few people, the capitalists, the bankers, big business. Our argument as a party is that we need a socialist Scotland, not only with the powers to bring in its own benefit system, its own welfare state, which is why as a party or one of the reasons we're for independence. But even if you don't agree with us on that, what we want is a socialist Scotland, not one where the millionaires rip off the millions, and the consequence is the horrific example of the bedroom tax. It's just a symptom of the system, a terrible one which we have to resist, but think as well about going further to permanently change the kind of lives we live under and join the SSP in fighting for a socialist future in society. So discuss, debate, give examples, argue, whatever you want to do in a nice manner, about the bedroom tax, but also look at the fact there is absolutely no excuse for this, but it's designed to enrich the rich in various different ways. It's designed to hammer the poorest and the working class. It's designed to rob us in the way they're doing on all sorts of fronts. Fight back, resist it, and if you think it suits you, also consider being a socialist that's organised to go further than that. Thanks a lot.
That was really quite rousing. Before we leave tonight, if anyone wants to give us their name to tell us whether they're prepared to help stop any evictions, because we'll probably have to set up things like phone trees and things like that, you know. So if you let us know if you're willing to help, you might not be able to help every single one, but you might be free to help if it comes to that, but hopefully it's not going to come to that. Okay, does anybody have something to say?
I'm only